Happy Friday, happy Labor Day weekend, and welcome to the Wrap. I'm Travis Fain, WRAL state government reporter.
And I'm Brian Anderson, another one of WRAL's state government reporters.
Yeah, we hope y'all are having a nice week and taking a little breath before campaign season really heats up, which I think you'll probably see happen roughly next week. Labor Day, kind of the unofficial kickoff, the sprint toward the November elections, which start sooner than that. I think counties are required to start having absentee ballots if you want one late next week. So we're there, Brian. We're there.
We're getting closer and closer. But to me, my takeaway is these races just haven't gotten much attention, especially in the national conversation. I'm thinking of the U.S. Senate race, which I know we'll get to, but there's just so many under discussed races here.
And I think some of that is the candidates. I was talking to someone earlier this week and can't remember who it was, but about that Ted Budd wasn't getting as much coverage, and I think that goes for Beasley as well. But I mean, when right to the south of us, your comparison is Herschel Walker. You know, the Dr. Oz up in Pennsylvania, and Fetterman, who he's running against in Pennsylvania. They're just maybe more compelling and easier narratives. Whereas here in but look, North Carolina always gets its day in the sun, so to speak, before this is all over. So I imagine we'll have some of the national boys and girls down here writing things up. And that I feel like we, WRAL and others in the North Carolina press corps, have written a good bit about the Senate race. I think you have written two stories this week. One about immigration, kind of featuring Budd and Trump and a bunch of other Republicans. We'll start with that one, and then we'll talk about Sherry Beasley as a pro law enforcement candidate as her campaign is trying to push.
Yeah, well, first I'll start by saying anytime I get to take a trip to Lexington, that's a good day for a reporter to make a barbecue and candy factory stop. So on Wednesday, Ted Budd, he's the current congressman and he's running for U.S. Senate as a Republican, and he held this immigration roundtable event where he was joined alongside Senator Tom Tillis, who's also a Republican, and there were also some law enforcement officials and border patrol advocacy types. And so basically, Budd had really tried to present himself as, I'm the most pro law enforcement and law and order candidate in this race, and immigration's a key part of that. The moment that stood out to me was actually after the event, where I had asked Tillis and Budd, let's assume that you get your majorities in the U.S. Senate. You're still going to have a President Biden. What can you realistically get done on immigration? And for Tillis, he said, I've bucked my party at times talking about DACA, possible pathways to citizenship. I want asylum reform and some other things as part of that process. And then you compare that and contrast that with Budd, who talked about the importance of having congressional hearings where you can talk about anything and anything you want for 5 minutes to hold Democrats accountable. So not exactly a bipartisan message, just will be a good check on the Biden administration when asked how you'll work with Democrats. So
Yeah,
that was a big takeaway.
Not much of a policy answer either. And of course, one of those men is running for election right now, and one of them doesn't have to worry about it for several years in Tillis. But I think it gets a little bit to the push-pull that a Senator Ted Budd would feel. Will he be more like Tillis on some of these issues? Gun control, for example, where Tillis is, crossed the aisle a bit, and immigration, where he has crossed the aisle and worked with Democrats, or will Bud continue to be more of a Trumpist style candidate? He's going to feel that pressure to go along with Tillis as the senior senator if he's elected, but he is also going to feel that pressure from the grassroots. And I don't know where he would come down if he won this election. But obviously, we're a long way between here and there. And I'll quickly note there were also a number of state legislative leaders there, making it clear that if they get a supermajority in the November elections, then they will continue to push some of the immigration law enforcement measures that Governor Roy Cooper has been vetoing the last couple of years. So that kind of focus on immigration, I think you'll see that a good bit, immigration and law enforcement issues at the state legislative level as well for Republicans.
Yeah, I spoke with Tim Moore a little bit, and he said, he plans to bring the what was SB 101 on greater cooperation between local sheriffs and ICE would bring that bill up again that Cooper has twice vetoed in the past. If you get your super majorities, you can pass that over Cooper's veto. So that's one of the many legislative items that Republicans would eye if they get that super majority in both chambers.
And I want to mention real quickly, Bud also did have some policy that he either spoke to or it was in his press release. He had a budget amendment, I believe, that did not pass, of course, where he would have taken that money in the latest, the Inflation Reduction Act, as the Democrats call it, that recently passed Congress, was to take the money that would hire 87,000, give or take, new IRS agents or bolster that agency. I think a lot of it is replacing agents that have been hit by budget cuts in the past. Spend that money instead on Border Patrol, people who work the border, but also judges, so that we don't have these long lead times between when someone is charged with illegally attempting to immigrate into this country and when they are actually moved through the court system. So that is a policy issue that he has put forward.
Really quick, one notable thing I do have to mention was a newsier thing that came out of it was he talked with Tillis about a letter that they had just sent to the Department of Homeland Security, in really asking questions about the people who are alleged to be responsible for the killing of Wake County Deputy Ned Byrd. And obviously a tragic situation when that happens, but Bud and Tillis are concerned that one of the brothers, may have had a history of past crimes, and that both had possibly been in the country and remain in the country unlawfully, and want some answers on that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what answers they do get from the Biden administration on that. I think they will not be the only ones interested. Beasley, the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate, she is not going to be pushed aside on law enforcement issues. She is not going to allow the Bud campaign to say, "Oh, he's the law enforcement candidate." She obviously has been a judge that has been much of her career, and she has been endorsed by a bunch of Democratic sheriffs. I mean, it's not really a surprise how it breaks down, but she has made some specific promises to work with Republicans and to push pro-law enforcement policies, funding policies, et cetera, at the federal level.
Yeah, her big message at an event in Durham on Monday was, I don't support defund the police. My opponent does. And she was saying that, citing some examples of Bud voting against these large spending bills that had police funding as part of it, but it certainly wasn't an up or down. Do you want to add more funding to the police? I'm sure Bud would have supported that. Bud had basically said, I oppose these larger spending plans that could add to the deficit. I have other concerns with it. But for Beasley's perspective, she's really trying to carve out that lane. Whether or not it'll be successful is another matter, and whether or not this is an election even about policy or going to be overshadowed by the national political dynamics and where abortion is at and where the economy is at remains to be seen.
Yeah, you kind of have to put your money on abortion and the economy as the two main issues driving federal elections right now. But every voter is unique and can decide as they wish. The Leandro case was back in court. You ready to move on from the United States Senate? We'll talk
Yes,
a little bit
let's
about.
do it.
So after 30 years, or I can't even remember how many years we've been talking about this case. This, of course, for anybody, I don't know who would be listening to this podcast that doesn't know about the Leandro case, but it is a lawsuit originally brought by Hope County, it's basically arguing that rural counties were not getting enough education funding. It has since kind of expanded to argue that there's not enough education funding in general in North Carolina to satisfy the state constitutionally guaranteed right to a solid and equitable around the state education. The question here is the state Supreme Court, which has a Democratic majority, a thin Democratic majority, going to order the Republican-controlled General Assembly to put more money into the school system? I've never heard of a court kind of taking the purse strings like that, which of course is the Republican argument against it. But there are also some nuanced arguments here too, whether or not this can be statewide. Is the Constitution actually being violated? What happens if Later on, people believe the Leandro plan needs to change. Can individual citizens intervene in this case? So there's a lot of legal wrangling going on, but I mean, ultimately, the decision is: does the court order the General Assembly to put hundreds of millions, if not billions, more into education over the coming years? And then how does the General Assembly react to that?
I mean, this just seems like one of the latest things that has added importance to these state Supreme Court races this year. You have a 4-3 Democratic majority currently, and Republicans just need to win one of the two seats up for grabs for that. There's potential for this Leandro decision to maybe come up with a conservative Supreme Court that might act differently than a Democratic one. You have redistricting, voter ID. You have so many things that remain outstanding, and this is just one of them.
Yeah, due to North Carolina policy of never finishing any, just let's just keep fighting about it. Let's not.
When one door closes, another opens. When one lawsuit closes, 5 more open.
Yeah, every lawyer in the state is just like,
Good state to be a lawyer.
yeah. Speaking of a little bit of lawyering, the hearing in is it the third state Senate district?
Yes.
Republican Bobby Hanig and Democrat Val Jordan. Val Jordan has been accused of not living in the district. She clearly has a place in Raleigh that she spends quite a bit of time at. The local board of elections down there in the third district said, "All right, we need, this investigation needs to move forward." That is before the state board of elections today at 3 p.m. We are taping this at about 12:50. So you'll have to go to nccapital.com to see how that turned out. But it's a big deal because every seat in the House and the Senate that the state legislative level is important as Democrats try to block Republicans from gaining a supermajority, and Republicans work for that supermajority. So
This is one of those competitive seats as well. It seems to possibly lean Democratic, and if Jordan is off the ballot, it would be up to party officials to find her replacement. If Jordan's left on the ballot, obviously things are unchanged and the state goes forward with ballot printing for voters in those 10 or so counties. But certainly very important and worth noting that the reason we're talking about this is because if you are a state house or state Senate candidate, you must have lived in the district you're seeking to represent for the year prior to the general election. So they have had to have lived in the district they're seeking to represent since November 8th, 2021. And Republicans have taken photos outside of a residence in Raleigh where Jordan has appeared to have spent the night for weeks and weeks.
yeah, it's a difficult thing to prove, at least to the satisfaction of people. And we should also note that the state board of elections, slight Democratic majority there.
I mean, Cooper said nothing will come of this, right? And
Right. The governor said
we will
nothing will
see.
come of this. The governor appoints the state board of elections. Of course, I believe it was the Currituck County board of elections that forwarded this along. That was a Democratic majority body that went against Val Jordan there. So we'll see what happens at the state level, but I think we can probably assume she will continue to be on the ballot. And of course, I've now said that on a recorded format before it happened, so can't wait to be proven wrong there. The vice president was in Durham this week. She spoke a little while about lowering healthcare costs, particularly for senior citizens. She was at the Durham Center for Life. She noted, that they're capping the cost of insulin. The Biden administration is, and Congress voted for this as well, on those who are on Medicare. Highlighted some other things, and she was in town as well for a high dollar fundraiser for Democrats. That was that Thursday evening, or was that Wednesday?
That was Thursday, and I've got to say, one person who wasn't there was Sherry Beasley, the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate. I asked, would Beasley go to this event, and why or why not? And the official response from the campaign was, and I'm quoting here: "While the vice president is in North Carolina for an official White House visit, Sherry is focused on her campaign to give North Carolinians a senator in Washington who will work for them." End quote. And so when I shared that statement, a lot of pushback in my Twitter notifications from frustrated Democrats who like Kamala Harris, or just think out of courtesy, you should join the vice president, no matter who it is and what her approval ratings are when she comes to visit. There's some concerns of, Hatch Act and campaigning versus public-private roles. But I mean, it's certainly noticeable that Beasley has distanced herself from this Biden administration.
I shudder to think of the amount of staff time, not just on this campaign, but others, spent on whether or not someone will go to meet the president or vice president when he or she comes to their state, as if we did not know someone was a Democrat or a Republican. And
And on Monday, she was asked about whether she'd welcome Biden to campaign for her, and her response was more or less to the effect of, "Have his people call my people," essentially, as saying, I'd welcome him to talk to North Carolinians. Okay, but would you welcome him to talk with you on stage? Oh well, I'd have to talk to him about that, more or less, was the
what
response.
what if you just don't ask me that question, Brian? What if what if I just don't answer? How about that?
Yeah. All my questions going forward will be talking about how great a candidate is and to what extent they like puppies, I guess.
I think we'll also get some idea over the next week or so whether or not there's going to be a debate, yeah, a Bud Beasley debate. Beasley has accepted a debate. The Bud folks saying that they were going to wait until after Labor Day, which again is this weekend, to make those decisions. I think a lot of people expect him to try to duck a debate, but we shall see. Um, you had a story today, Friday, about Bo Hines and Wiley Nichols' campaign in the 13th, and how just like nobody apparently lives there.
It's quite the bromance, Travis, really. I mean, these two candidates really like each other. No, so basically, for some backstory, you have State Senator Wiley Nickel, who's lived in Cary for some time. He represents Wake County in the state legislature as a state senator, has since 2019. In fact, he's voted 21 different elections, so that includes primaries, runoffs, and generals in Wake County, and that's since 2010, I believe. So a long history in this community, but not in the congressional district that he's seeking to represent. He lives in, I believe, Deborah Ross's second district, but he's running in this newly formed 13th district. I looked on Google Maps, and the distance is like 3.7 miles northwest. He is of where that district line is. So Hines's campaign is saying, "Hey, Nickel can't even vote for himself. How's he fit to lead and represent this community?" And Nickel's response is more or less, "Are you kidding me, Bo Hines? I've been in this area for a while." And Hines just moved to this area in April from a Winston-Salem condo to a rental home in Fuquay. And Hines had been a student and football player at NC State around 2014, 2015 for a year and a half. So he also cites that uh, as some additional ties to the community. But Bo Hines certainly spent much of the campaign in the primary in the Greensboro area, not in the Raleigh area. District maps changed, so he moved. But yeah, both candidates arguing that the other is unqualified.
Yeah, I certainly on my bingo card did not have Bo Hines throwing this particular stone from the glass house that he rents in Fuquay Arena. But he's not wrong. I mean, Wiley Nickel lives very close to, but not in the district as it exists now, because again, we know that these districts are going to be redrawn over the next year. So this is kind of a one-term shot at this particular district. So
And unlike legislative candidates, to be clear, state law, if you're a congressional candidate, you can run wherever you want. Madison Cawthorn could have run in the Outer Banks if he felt like it.
that's right.
But also the thing I do have to say that is interesting as part of that story is you've had Nickel try and link Hines to this defund the FBI effort. And so I actually asked Hines about that in an interview on Thursday, just to try and understand and pin his views down on this issue. And his exact words to me were, I would be certainly okay with defunding the political appointees at the top of the chain. I'm not talking about the rank and file that work hard to protect our communities every day, but there needs to be some light that shined on these agencies that have operated in the dark for so long," end quote, he says. So that's certainly calls for defunding of some FBI people, but not the full-on defunding that Nickel has alleged.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a bit of a have your cake and eat it too kind of statement, but I think probably a lot of people would agree with him. I mean, who doesn't? Who trusts the bosses anyway? You know, it's the people they hire though apparently are great. Greg Lindbergh, who was once North Carolina's largest political donor, like $5 million, like big time money. He got a new trial this week. He was convicted of trying to bribe State Insurance Commissioner Mike Causey. A couple of years ago, served some time in a federal prison. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals said, the jury instructions were off in that. And on Monday, he was given a new trial. It will be March 2023. He also got hit with a Securities and Exchange Commission complaint, basically saying he's bilking money, or he bilked money out of insurance companies he owns here in North Carolina. I don't know how much Lindbergh will come up in our elections here, although I will say that Wesley Meredith, who was running against Val Applewhite in Cumberland County for a Senate seat, was a significant recipient of Greg Lindbergh money. So as he stays in the news, it could have an impact on our elections, but I don't know. I will also mention quickly the State Department of Revenue said this week that the student loans that are going to be forgiven under the Biden administration's plan will be taxed. That money will be taxable in North Carolina. Like if someone just forgives you a debt, that's usually taxable. In this case, it's not taxable at the federal level, but it would be taxable at the state level. I am seeking more information about how that actually works, because the Department of Education has to do some rigmarole before the money is actually forgiven. I'm not sure if all the money is forgiven all at once and thus is a tax liability for a single tax year, or if that's spread out. I'm also not sure if the Department of Education will get done what it needs to get done at all in the tax year 2022. So this could be a 2023 tax issue, which would mean it would be something that the General Assembly would be back in session and could potentially change, although I don't know that a Republican-led General Assembly would do that.
And this is applicable to people who had $125,000 in income or less. So it's not every single person, and it's limited to $10,000 for most people. But if you have Pell Grants and qualify, could be up to $20,000. So I'm trying to do the quick math in my head on the income tax levels in North Carolina, and maybe it amounts to giving back several $100s to the state.
It's about 5%. But it would be I mean, if it's $10,000 or $20,000 at once and you're paying 5% on that, it'd be a nice little surprise for some people, and would add up. Quickly, I want to highlight a tweet from Stephen Wiley, who is the Republican caucus director in the state house. Quote, really big underdevelopment, under the radar development, the deadline to replace Dr. Kristen Baker's withdrawn Democratic opponent on the ballot passed last week. After having the second most expensive House race in history in 2020, Baker is now unopposed this November. So this is a state legislator in the House, Kristen Baker, who will not have a Democratic opponent. And there are several Republicans who don't have opposition from the Democratic Party. Wiley notes Donnie Lambeth, John Bell, Representative Winslow, and now Baker unopposed. And Democrats are not running to win a majority in the General Assembly, and particularly in this case, the House. They're on defense trying to block a supermajority. And I think that just kind of throws that into starker relief, that in this kind of competitive district, they have not fielded a new candidate to replace their withdrawn candidate against Representative Kristen Baker. That's interesting.
For sure. One thing I should add for the weekend, people should check nccapital.com. Well, I've been working on a story for a little bit of time, and really me getting on my reporter soapbox here. I got to say, the U.S. Senate race is very important. It has not gotten nearly enough attention, especially at the national level. We also have one of the most competitive congressional races in the nation, with that 13th district race between Hines and Nickel. And so really the focus of this is, how are candidates going from a primary election strategy to a general election strategy? We have some new reporting on that, some past opponents saying some interesting things. And really the takeaway I'm left with is Bud has remained fairly consistent in his messaging, and maybe less middle ground, though he has created some more distance with Trump. Beasley, it has been moderate for a little bit in her messaging, but this congressional race, there's a lot of pivots and hard left turns that have taken place.
Yeah. So check for what Brian's got coming for you this weekend. I'll mention also very quickly that State Representative Bobby Hanig is now Senator Bobby Hoenig. We mentioned earlier that he is running for the moment against Val Jordan in the 3rd Senate District, but he replaced Senator Bob Steinberg, who left early, we believe, to become a lobbyist after losing his primary. All this district, like many others, got redrawn. But so Hoenig is Steinberg's replacement and is now in the state Senate. Don't quite know what to expect next week. Legislature, I don't believe, has much going on, but campaign season, like we said, will be getting into full swing. And Brian, unless you got anything else.
Go visit the Lexington Candy Factory. You got to do it.
Well, and you
I'm
know
not
what?
getting paid for this endorsement. I have to say, it's just, they have Clark bars back in stock. They have Abba Zabbas. It's a great place.
And you know what? I'll make some controversy here. Lexington barbecue is fine, but if you really want a road trip barbecue based, you need to go to Aden, Skylight Inn. It's best in the world. No question about it. No
Delete
question
your
about it.
account, Mr. Fain. Delete your account.
I hope everybody has a nice weekend and is able to spend time with family and friends. And we'll catch you up on the week that it was next week here on The Wrap.